may have been the greatest army of all time, conquering and controlling an empire that stretched across the ancient Western world. It was ruthless, disciplined, and feared by all, not just by its enemies, who died in their millions, but by its own emperors, who often paid the price of the army's wrath. And yet, these soldiers were builders as well as destroyers, helping to spread a culture that became the bedrock of Western civilization. What was it that made this army so dominant? How was it able to rule and reshape the classical world? And why did it eventually fall? This is the story of the Roman war machine. The glory that was Rome was built largely upon the power of its army. Until it discovered how to wage war, Rome was just another small Italian farming settlement. But there was something different about the Romans. They had a unique ability to turn themselves into a political and military power without equal. The city that would dominate the ancient world for centuries began as early as 1000 BC. Archaeologists have found the remains of dwellings from that period on Rome's Palatine Hill, where many centuries later, the Roman emperors built their palaces. Early Rome was dominated by a neighbor, the Etruscans, from what is now Tuscany to the north. Etruscan kings took control of Rome around 600 BC and ruled it for a century before the Romans expelled them. Rome then began creating the political and military system we recognize today. Rome became a republic with a Senate and two chief executives, the consuls, who were elected for one-year terms to handle important matters, including the military. Rome had to learn how to fight because it occupied an important trading crossroads on the Tiber River, and it was always skirmishing with envious neighbors. As early as 500 BC, Rome had an army of 6,000 men called a legion, from the Latin word meaning conscription. But this was a far cry from the professional Roman army that would later dominate the world.
They are citizen soldiers, they are part-time soldiers, they get recruited for the campaigning season. They leave their fields, their work, to go off and fight in the army. At the end of the campaign, they're back, bringing in the harvest, bringing in the vintage, plowing the fields.
Every year, able-bodied Roman men were summoned by trumpet to report for enlistment. But not all men. Only landowners were trusted to fight for Rome because they had something to protect. Service was regarded as a duty and an honor, and a must for any Roman seeking political power.
The Roman people are reluctant to vote for people who cannot show their war wounds. There are many stories of people standing for politics in the Forum, ripping their clothes to show their wounds, to demonstrate that they have fought for Rome in battle.
Romans had to provide their own armor and weapons, so the wealthiest, the officers, had a helmet, armor, a spear, a sword, and a shield, while the poorest, the front ranks, had no armor and had only slings and stones for weapons. The early Roman army was modeled on the Greeks, especially the basic tactical formation. The Greek army used the so-called phalanx, a tight-knit, rolling infantry formation which came at the enemy like a forest of spears.
Your whole army lined up, facing forward in lines, and then the first few ranks would hold out their spears and their shields, and the army would move forward en masse. The object was to simply push aside the enemy, and in the course of it, kill as many as possible.
Rome's first major victory was against its old nemesis, the Etruscans, when Rome conquered the nearby city of Veii in 396 BC. But the Romans didn't have long to celebrate. 6 years later, they met an entirely new kind of enemy, when Celtic warriors from the north swept down upon Rome. The Celts were a people linked by language, culture, and style of warfare. And Celtic tribes were spread across Europe, from Ireland to France and Switzerland. In 390 BC, a Celtic army thrashed the Roman legion and overran Rome.
The Celtic method of fighting was very disturbing to them. The Celts simply ran at you with hundreds and thousands of men, yelling, shouting, banging on metal objects, blowing their horns. They really terrified the Romans.
The Celts left the city only after the Romans bribed them with gold. This was Rome's wake-up call. It needed to rethink its whole military strategy if it was to survive, and one way was through training. Roman soldiers had to go through the toughest training in the ancient world. There were 4 long, hard months of basic training, and anyone who couldn't stand the pace was either discharged or put on rations of foul-tasting barley until they got it right. Basic training began with marching, and plenty of it. Soldiers had to be able to march more than 20 miles in 5 hours, carrying a full pack. In weapons training, recruits were given dummy swords, shields, and javelins that weighed twice as much as the real things to build muscles.
The Romans, I think, in this early period, should really be seen as the Zulus of the Mediterranean world. They are a highly militarized society, and like the Zulus, they don't let their warriors have sex, so when they come into battle, they're very tough.
As the army grew, armor became standardized for all soldiers and provided by the state.
I'm wearing a male shirt for body protection, and you can see it's made of small individual pieces of metal which are fashioned into rings and then linked together. Its biggest advantage, of course, is to take slashing blows across. Because the male links all sit together, if an enemy hit me with a sword in a slashing way, it would actually take the blow. The disadvantage of mail was that it doesn't, in fact, take a stabbing at all. If you stab through the mail, the point of the sword will actually pierce the rings.
Beginning in the 1st century AD, the Romans also used segmented plate armor, held together by leather straps. It was so much more complicated than mail armor that soldiers needed help to put it on.
You can see all the protections on the top rather than around the legs and things. And the reason for that is that when you've got the Celts fighting you with their long slashing swords, you needed all that protection up on the top rather than the bottom. It also gives you a chance to run.
The Roman helmet, gradually redesigned over the centuries, aimed to give maximum protection without blocking the senses.
You can see it's a round bowl protecting the top of my head. Round because it's got very good glancing blow action. A square helmet would take the blow, whereas a round helmet, the blow would glance off. Large cheek pieces to protect the side of my face, and a small neck guard at the back to actually take an overhand blow protecting the back of my neck. Now, obviously, you can see there's no covering on my face or on my ears, in fact. And the Romans decided that it was a lot better for a soldier to be able to see around him and hear orders, very vital in battle.
Further protection came from the Roman shield, smaller and round in early times, developing later into a bigger rectangular one. It was made of layers of wood glued together, bound, and covered with leather and metal.
The thing about the Roman shield is it's curved, not flat like most shields of the time. This gives me protection all around my body. And if I'm coming at you in battle, it's not only a defensive weapon, it's an offensive weapon. I can smash you in the face, and then while you're off balance, draw the sword and in under your ribs.
When it came to offensive weapons, the first one the Roman soldier would use in battle was the javelin.
great thing about the Roman javelin is, when you threw it, the enemy couldn't throw it back. These are delivered in volleys of hundreds. As they rain down, the hard iron tip will punch through the armor. The weight of the handle will bend this soft metal shank. It'll be useless, you can't throw it back. Your shield is useless, you're probably hurt, you're in big trouble.
But the weapon that won the empire and kept it was the Roman sword.
Once the javelins had been expended, the Roman legion would then move in with probably the most vicious of his weapons, the short sword, or gladius in Latin. Very much a close-quarter weapon. It's much shorter than you would envisage a sort of a medieval broadsword to be, because it actually is much shorter. It's designed with a very broad base, tapering to a very, very sharp point. Now, the idea of this weapon was purely to stab. The soldier was trained to actually stab into an enemy soldier, mainly in the stomach area, because, of course, there's no bone for it to actually get jammed in. And, of course, a quick stab and withdrawal would put him out of action one way or the other. Now, the soldier was trained not to use an overhand blow, but purely a stabbing action. In the modern way, a soldier uses the bayonet, really.
The thing about this Roman sword is it's shortened to the point, and it's used for stabbing rather than slashing.
The barbarians, their swords aren't like ours. They're long and broad, and it's all an ego trip on the battlefield, slashing around above their heads, all style, that's all it is.
And while they're doing that, it's up and under stabbing to the ribs, and so we make mincemeat of the barbarians.
The Roman army was ready to use their weapons and training to build an empire, and the first victims were their fellow Italians.